Wild rice has twice the protein of white rice and 30 times the antioxidants. Native tribes guarded it for over 1,000 years. But by the 1950s, scientists copied it, farmers faked it, and today, more than 95% of the wild rice you buy isn't wild at all. So why did they try to erase North America's only native grain?
This plant is both a medicine and a food, and we call it green weight. After we harvest it, after we take it out of our canoe, we take it in and we put it down on tarps, and we can air dry it out for 3 to 5 days. And that's to allow the moisture to leave it. Because if we store it with moisture in it, it will spoil, it will most likely mold.
So let's start with what manoomin actually is.
Manoomin, also known as wild rice, is an ancient species of grain-producing grass native to the Great Lakes area. It grows in the shallow, quiet waters of inland lakes and slow-flowing streams. Once plentiful in places like the Upper Peninsula, wild rice beds have dwindled due to habitat loss, degraded water quality, and other factors.
The first twist breaks people's brains. Wild rice isn't rice. It's not even a close cousin. It's a tall grass that grows straight out of shallow lakes and slow rivers, mostly around Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the Great Lakes. Scientists call it zizania, and it holds a title nothing else on your plate can touch. It's the only grain that started right here in North America. Wheat, oats, barley, white rice, all of that sailed in from across an ocean. But not this one. The Ojibwe people call it manoomin, which means the good seed that grows on water, and some elders just call it the good berry.
Wild rice has 4 different names that I know it by, and that's manoomin, that's the Ojibwe-Moan word, Anishinaabe, also the food that grows on water, and the good berry.
And they didn't treat it like a side dish. They treated it like a gift, a medicine, and the whole reason their nation existed. Minnesota eventually caught on too and named wild rice its official state grain way back in 1977. But to get why these families guarded it so hard, you've got to see what's packed inside those skinny black grains. Now look at why it beats white rice so badly.
Here we have white rice. We'll try a little bit of that. Ooh. Now, brown rice. And here we have the wild rice. We'll try some of that. It's delicious.
Cup for cup, cooked wild rice gives you about twice the protein of white or brown rice. And it's a complete protein, which means it carries all 9 of the amino acids your body can't make on its own. That's pretty rare for a grain. But the antioxidants are where it gets crazy. Scientists at the University of Manitoba tested 11 different wild rice samples, and a food researcher named Trust Beta found the antioxidant power ran 30 times higher than plain white rice. And I don't mean 30% higher, I mean 30 times higher. On top of that, you're loading up on fiber, zinc, magnesium, phosphorus, and a big hit of manganese. And the whole thing is naturally gluten-free. It's a whole grain too, so it hits your blood sugar way softer than white rice does. So while white rice is mostly soft, empty filler, manoomin is the exact opposite. That's the easy win though. The one everybody argues about is wheat, but the real fight is wild rice against wheat. Back in 1976, a University of Minnesota researcher named Irvin Olke measured this stuff properly, and his numbers turned heads. Wild rice had nearly twice the lysine of wheat. Lysine matters because it's the one building block wheat is famously short on, so that gap is huge. When he added up the amino acids your body needs most, they made up around 45% of the total in wild rice, against just 32% in wheat. But I'm going to be straight with you, the way most videos won't. Wheat does carry a little more total protein overall. The catch is this. Wild rice wins on balance, it wins on lysine, and it wins by being totally gluten-free. So the quality of what you're eating is flat out better. And the wild part? The people who cracked all this had no lab, no microscope, no fancy degree. They figured it out thousands of years ago.
It's Indian rice. wild rice. And it's very nutritious, very tasty. You can make all kinds of things with wild rice. You can use fruit in it, meat, make a casserole, stir fry. Our people used to make popcorn out of it once they harvested. Yeah.
That's where the Ojibwe prophecy comes in. This is where it stops being about food and starts feeling like destiny.
Our ancestors passed our history from one generation to the next by telling stories. Elders would gather together with the youth and their children and grandchildren and talk about the things that happened to us in our past and tell the story of our history and also impart some moral teachings about how we as a community were supposed to act.
A long time ago, Ojibwe oral history tells of a prophecy. It was part of what they call the Seven Fires prophecy.
The Seven Fires prophecy came to the Potawatomi when our ancestors lived in the extreme northeast of what is now today known as North America. The prophets came and said that there would be a time when we would need to move inward until they found a place where food grew on water.
A string of warnings and signs passed down through the generations. The people were told to leave the eastern coast and travel west, following a sacred shell they called the Medjus, until they reached the land where food grows on water. So they went. Not for a year, but for generations, pushing deeper inland, chasing that one sign. The whole story was written down much later by an Ojibwe teacher named Edward Benton Benai in a book called the Mishomish Book. And when they finally hit the Great Lakes and saw fields of grain swaying right on top of the water, they knew they were home. The food that grows on water was real, and it was Manoomin. A white earth historian named Andy Favorite later put it perfectly, saying they're living a prophecy that came true. Still, the Ojibwe weren't the only people whose whole identity got tied to this grain. Even wilder is the tribe named after it, the Menominee. The Menominee people of Wisconsin took their actual name from the grain. Their name, Menominee, means the wild rice people.
Menominee is an Algonquin word. The full word is Omatnamanewak. It's people of the wild rice. At the time of creation, the Creator gave us two special gifts so that we would always have them. Those two gifts were wild rice and maple sugar. And throughout the years after that, the Menominees were always in the midst of the wild rice. And it would seem like wherever we traveled, the rice would be there. And if we left that area, the rice would follow us. So the neighboring tribes gave us that name, Menominee, people of the wild rice.
When French traders rolled through, they called them the Folle of Oin, which meant the wild oats folks, because they couldn't get over how much these communities lived on rice. And this goes back way further than you'd guess. Pollen dug out of the mud at Big Rice Lake in Minnesota shows wild rice was being gathered in big amounts around 3,600 years ago. This grain carried families through winters that could kill you, because once it was roasted and dried, it sat in storage for months without going bad. It was so valuable that different tribes fought over the best rice waters for over 100 years. Some Menominee even believed that planting any other crop would offend the Creator. So to them, this rice wasn't just dinner, it was holy. And the way they collected it might be the most beautiful part of this whole story. Wait till you hear how they harvest it. The method has barely changed in centuries, and that's on purpose. Two people climb into a canoe together. One stands in the back and pushes the boat through the rice beds with a long pole. The other sits up front, holding two smooth cedar sticks called knockers. They gently bend the tall stalks over the canoe and tap them, just hard enough to shake the ripe grains loose into the boat. Tap, tap, and the grain rains down.
For an entire day, you're with this plant. One person is pulling the canoe along and the other is, we say knocking, but it's more like a whoosh, whoosh. And with every single whoosh, 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 you've got another bite coming in the boat, another bite to bring you through the fall, through the winter, into the spring, and into next summer.
And the genius part nobody talks about? Since you only knock loose the grains that fully ripe, a ton of seed falls right back into the lake. That fallen seed replants the water for next season. So this year's harvest literally plants next year's harvest for free, forever.
Because you're picking by hand, most of it is landing on inside the canoe. And some of it is falling into the water, and that's next year's crop, you see? They picked and planted at the same time. It was a beautiful life.
French explorers like Jacques Marquette wrote about watching this exact scene back in the 1600s, and another explorer named Pierre Esprit Radisson described the same canoe and sticks trick. The rules are still strict today, because those knocking sticks can't be longer than 30 inches or heavier than a pound, so nobody can just thrash the beds and wreck them. And the work didn't stop at the water. Back on land, they'd roast the grain over a fire, then gently dance on it in soft moccasins to knock the hulls off, a step they call jigging. After that, they'd toss it on birch bark trays so the wind could carry the husks away. You can even throw the dry grains in a hot pan and pop them like tiny popcorn. One more secret most people miss? The rice doesn't all ripen at once, so ricers paddle through the same beds 2 or 3 times in a season. However, something was rolling toward those rice beds that would nearly wipe them off the map. Then came the dams that drowned everything. When settlers pushed in, they were hungry for 2 things: water power and lumber, and the rivers handed over both. So they started throwing up dams everywhere. The problem is, wild rice is super picky about water depth. Get it too deep, and the plant just drowns. Back in the 1930s, a dam called the Buckmore Dam went up on the Rum River in Minnesota and pushed the water level up on Ogeechee Lake. That lake had fed native families for generations. After the dam, it sat almost dead empty of rice for more than 70 years. And that wasn't a freak accident. The Smithsonian says that since the 1880s, dams have been flooding rice habitat across the Mississippi region. And even now, more than 2,000 dams across Minnesota and Wisconsin still put these plants at risk. Logging made it uglier, choking the clean lakes with runoff and mud. But drowning the rice was only round 1. Round 2 was swapping it out for a knockoff. Soon after, the paddy rice takeover began. In the 1950s, the University of Minnesota figured out how to grow wild rice in flooded man-made paddies, just like regular rice. Then California jumped in during the 1970s and started pumping it out by the truckload. It's cheaper to grow, it looks close enough, and it quietly swallowed almost the whole market. Today, more than 95% of the so-called wild rice on grocery shelves never touched a wild lake in its life. It's paddy-grown and harvested by machines. Real hand-knocked lake rice can cost you $25 to $30 a pound, while the farmed copy sells for about half that. And the farmed supply jumps around wildly year to year, dropping from about 24 million pounds in 2016 down to roughly 13.5 million pounds by 2021. So most people walking around have never once tasted the real thing. They've only had the fake. But that fake started a fight nobody saw coming, and it landed inside a science lab. This is the genome fight that made tribes furious. Around the year 2000, University of Minnesota scientists, led by a researcher named Ronald Phillips, started mapping out the genetic code of wild rice. To the scientists, it was just a project. To the Ojibwe, someone was picking the lock on something sacred. The president of the Minnesota Chippewa tribe, Norman Deschamps, fired off a sharp letter telling them to stop using their wild rice just to make money, saying they'd been promised this rice and every bit of value it held. And the fear behind it was dead simple. If a company could patent some version of manoomin, or if lab-built rice ever leaked into the wild lakes and mixed into the original, the real grain could be lost for good. So in May 2007, Minnesota passed a law forcing a full environmental check before anyone could grow genetically modified wild rice. And they pushed it through even with the university and the giant company Monsanto fighting against it. And the tribes were nowhere near done protecting it. In the end, the tribes hit the Supreme Court. Rewind to 1837. In a treaty signed that year, the Ojibwe held onto the right to hunt, fish, and gather wild rice on the exact lands they were giving up. And people often point out that wild rice is the only grain ever named in a treaty like that.
I would have loved to have gone into the history of this wild rice and gone into real depth around this whole subject, but I boiled it down to just a few sentences here. So Senate File 3749 is adding just one sentence to the definition of our state grain. It states, "It is the policy of this state to recognize the inherent right of uncultivated wild rice to exist and thrive in Minnesota."
For decades, the state of Minnesota basically pretended that promise didn't exist, so it went to court, and it kept climbing until it hit the highest court in the country. In 1999, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in the case of Minnesota versus the Mille Lacs Band, and in a razor-thin 5-4 decision, the justices said those treaty rights from 1837 were still alive. The state had argued those rights died when the government tried to force the Ojibwe off that land back in 1850. The court said, no, the promise still stood. The tribes had won. But the boldest move in this whole story came almost 20 years later, and it flipped the idea of what a plant can even be. Years later, White Earth created the Rights of Manoomin. In 2018, the White Earth Band of Ojibwe, working with a group called the 1855 Treaty Authority, passed a law that handed the wild rice itself legal rights.
In that process of treaty making, our people reserve a place to live. The government promises us 800 square miles or 512,000 acres for this reservation on which we will live to keep us safe from bad white men who will come.
It didn't give those rights to the people who harvested it. It gave them to the plant. It was the first law in the whole United States to give a plant actual legal rights. The law says Manoomin has the right to exist, to grow, to stay clean, and to be free from patents and from lab-built contamination. And this wasn't just a feel-good move. In 2021, lawyers filed a real case in tribal court, and the one suing, listed right at the top, was the wild rice. The grain itself sued the state of Minnesota. Why? Because a state permit had let the company Enbridge pump up to 5 billion gallons of water for a pipeline project during a drought, the exact water the rice needed to stay alive. It was the first case of its kind ever filed in a tribal court, a plant standing up to defend itself. Yet while those court battles roared on, a quieter movement was already pulling Manoomin back from the edge. Right now, a handful of people are saving this grain. Back in 1984, 11 Ojibwe tribes joined forces and built a group called the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission to defend their treaty foods, and wild rice sits dead center of that work. They reseed lakes by hand, scattering grain across waters that went silent years ago. Out on the St. Louis River near Lake Superior, crews working with the tribes and the government agency NOAA poured more than $400,000 into bringing the rice back to a spot that had lost it. They fight to keep mining pollution out because the sulfate that drains off mines can smother the rice, which is why Minnesota's had a legal limit on it since 1973. Native-led businesses like Native Harvest, built through Winona LaDuke's White Earth Land Recovery Project, now sell the real hand-roasted grain so the tradition keeps breathing. It's slow, patient, stubborn work, and the clock's ticking, because a 2018 climate study rated Manoomin extremely vulnerable, since even the wrong water level in June can wipe out a whole crop, and warmer winters and wild floods keep messing with the water it needs.
So one of the other things that is very, very important is the water level. The water level has to be pretty much consistent. It can't rise up and down, especially in that floating leaf stage. So that leaf, when you have a wake or even a wind, when you get the bigger winds, it's like keeps tugging at it. And so since the sediment is so loose, it'll only withstand and it'll actually become uprooted.
And in a strange twist, some of the same University of Minnesota scientists who once angered the tribes are now teaming up with them, trying to repair the trust they broke. But every single reseeded lake is a quiet way of fighting back against everything that tried to kill off this grain. And the rice helps too, because when the water's healthy, Manoomin replants itself year after year, exactly like it always has. Before you go, remember this about real wild rice. So next time you see wild rice on a shelf, flip the bag and read it, because it's probably not wild at all. If this story grabbed you, hit subscribe.